Hello and welcome to session 6 of UK's Changing Landscapes, which is the third lesson on coasts. This is going to be the final session where we look at coastal processes. So physical coastal processes which can lead to the formation of certain coastal landforms. So previous sessions to this have been erosion, weathering, mass movement. You've also looked at transportation, longshore drift, and we're going to finish off those processes by looking today at geology again, but more geological structure than anything, and waves and types of wave. Okay, so make sure you've got the title written down, and when you have, please carry on. So the difference between these two bands, and put your musical taste aside, when you consider that these are both types of rock, okay, which is quite key. The left-hand side of the band called Slipknot, they're whatever you feel about them, I don't think they're very good, but they are definitely what you'd maybe class as hard rock, whereas Coldplay are certainly what you'd consider more soft rock. And the theme of hard and soft rock is really, really important when we come to look at the coast and how it can affect and shape the coast going long term. So, we know about geology already. We know about igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary. Okay, and this is something which I'm not going to offer you a merit because I can't see you, but what I'd like you to do is maybe just consider the different types of rock that we're already aware about from the first lesson of this topic, and just recap and maybe reread those pages in your notes to familiarise yourself with the difference when it comes to resistance. Okay, once you've done that bit of a recap, it will really help you kind of just go straight into the kind of key concepts of this session. So now we know type of geology and how that could affect erosion and things like that. It's really important that we then look at the structure of that geology. Now, what I mean by that is it's all very well and good having granite, which we know is a really hard igneous rock. But if your granite bricks are put together in a way which weakens them, if they're stacked up a certain way, or they're next to another type of rock, for example, then the structure means that they have weaknesses. They have things that can be exploited by erosion and weathering and mass movement and all these things that we have already looked at. So geological structure is how the rocks, the type of rocks, have kind of been put together. Now, by put together, that's obviously not a man-made process. That is something which is naturally occurring, and there is no rock that is completely faultless. It has, no weakness in it that can't be breached in some way. It might just take a lot longer than other rock types. And there are different coastlines that we name them slightly differently according to the pattern of their geological structure. Okay, so some coastlines are concordant, some coastlines are discordant, and we've already mentioned this, or I said this, some rocks have joints and faults and things like that. So joints or bedding planes, any area of weakness in it. So today, the first thing we're going to be looking at are these two types of coastline and how different joints and faults and cracks and things in rocks can affect the landforms that occur there. So here is a handout, which again is on 365. Please make sure you get it. This is a handout of a hand-drawn diagram of the Dorset coastline. And the Dorset coastline is a really great example from a geography perspective. It's kind of the coastline that shows everything you want to show. On one side over here, it's got a discordant coast. And a discordant coast, and you need to write this definition down on your handout, or your book is fine, is where you've got different bands of hard and soft rock running at right angles to the coast. So the stripes, okay, you can see, kind of butt up against the waves that would occur over here. So that's called a discordant coast. You've got soft, hard in sort of layers that way. A concordant coast, okay, which is here, is where you've actually got the opposite, where the layers of rock are parallel to the coast and to the oncoming waves. So the waves are coming in, okay, and they are hitting essentially the same type of rock because that rock acts like a big wall. Here, the rock, you've kind of got the side of the wall, so you've got different, like I say, geologies, different resistances, and along the bottom here, effectively, I mean, it would originally been just this limestone, the Portland and Purbeck beds, which is quite resistant. Okay, and then you've got your layer behind that of sands and clays. Then you've got your chalk, and then you've got your other sands and clays, the Wealden beds. So this is a discordant coast, and this is a concordant coast. That's the first thing you need to know for your notes, is the difference between the two. Now, how you can remember discordant and concordant is well, other than just memorizing it and learning it the usual way, there's always these little tricks to try and help you remember. And it really relates to the features that you can find on these coastlines. A discordant coast, okay, tends to have bays, inhibits, and headlands that stick out, okay. And either way you look at it, okay, it looks a little bit like a D shape. Okay, if the headland sticks out, ordinarily it could form like a little D shape. So the bays definitely form a capital D shape, just sort of backwards. So the D for discordant is really, really handy. For concordant coasts, it's the other thing. So it can form a bit of a D shape, which I know is a bit contradictory, but this is actually a cove, and that forms a C shape. Okay, whereas a D shape, okay, is very much like this. Again, if you look at this backwards, if you did a straight line across it, would create a capital D, just in mirror form. A C shape, well, what makes a C different to a D? Okay, let's look at the letter C on here. It curls round a little bit, all right? So you can see the C shape there. And that is actually the shape of a feature called a cove, and you've got a place called Lulworth Cove, and some of you might have been to Lulworth Cove. And this is created by hard rock, but which has weaknesses in it. So I'll explain that. Get the notes for discordant coast and concordant coast, and then when you're ready, unpause the screen, and I'll explain this last little bit, which I also want you to get a couple of notes about. Okay, so what we know about this coast is that this geology here is a bit harder because it sticks out here, so it must be. It creates a headland over at Durlston. So where it meets the sea here, it really acts like a barrier to the waves and protects anything behind it. But you can see at Lulworth Cove, it's been breached. Okay, it's been waves have allowed to get, or been able to get through that hard layer of limestone, and that's because some harder rocks, like limestone, can and does have weaknesses in it. Particularly limestone and chalk, because they are sedimentary rocks. So any weaknesses in a rock we call a fault. Alright, so if you had a product, you bought a product that had a crack in it, you'd call it a fault, wouldn't you? It's a faulty product. So they're called faults, and waves, particularly through hydraulic action, can exploit those faults. So even if you've got very hard rock, it can actually erode that rock a bit faster where you've got a fault, because that hydraulic action can take over. So again, you might also have joints or bedding planes, which are also they're just versions of faults, which can be exploited in the same way. So what's happened at Lulworth Cove is that a little fault has opened out, and then as soon as the waves have managed to get through that fault, behind it is sand and clay, which we know is not very resistant. It erodes faster. And it's actually carved out a kind of a bowl shape behind a narrow opening, because this narrow opening is only able to be exploited so much, whereas the soft rock behind is much more easily eroded once the waves can get through. Okay, so that explains this feature of the cove. But the key thing I want you to remember here is concordant coasts, are the ones where the rocks are parallel to the coast. Discordant are where they are at right angles to the oncoming waves. And this idea of faults or joints or bedding planes are weaknesses. Okay, make sure your notes are up to date, and then we can move on. So now you know about geological structure, and that's all the notes you need for that. The last thing we need to look at, and the last factor which can affect our coastal landscapes, is waves. And these are really important, actually. Waves are the thing that creates the hydraulic action, abrasion, attrition solution. Waves are also what create the traction, saltation, suspension solution, and longshore drift. And waves, ultimately, when they run out of energy, are also the thing that lead to deposition. So waves are the key to the coastal change, really. They are one of the factors that affects it the most, aside from the geology. And there are two main types of wave that you can find. And some waves are nice, gentle, rolling waves, and we call them constructive waves. Okay, and don't worry about this video. This video is on 365. Please feel free to watch it if you want to just stop listening to my voice for a bit. But constructive waves are a gentle type of wave, and then there's the other type of wave, which is destructive waves. Now, both constructive and destructive waves can happen anywhere at any time, because they are affected by the main driver that creates waves, that forms waves, and that is the wind. The wind is critical. Don't start running on about the moon. That's to do with tides. They're not the same thing. Waves, these kind of things that crash onto the beach time after time after time, are generated by the wind. So if the wind is gentle, you will get gentle waves. If the wind is strong, you'll get strong waves. And there are obviously other factors at play too. You need to be aware of how waves are formed. You can't just say by the wind. You need to have a little bit more detail to it. So what I would like you to do, first task, okay, with regards to waves, new subheading, is this sketch. And I know I can almost hear the moaning from here about having to do another sketch, but please do, because the sketch is the best way to explain the formation of waves in one kind of bit of information without you just having to write loads. That said, you are going to have to write a bit in a minute. Sorry about that. But get this sketch, okay, really, really well drawn, okay, accurately drawn in your notes. Pause the screen while you do it, and then we're going to explain what happens and why waves break as well at the coast. So pause the screen to do that, and when you're ready, unpause, please. Okay, so now you've got your really good diagram of waves. I want a detailed explanation about how waves form and then break, so the whole process of waves. So I've got a nice classic copy and complete for you to do. You should be able to do this without any of my help because your diagram will help you through it. Okay, so copy and complete, get your full set of notes up to scratch, and once you're ready, unpause the screen and I'll go through the answers. Okay, so hopefully by now you've done the copy and complete. Here are the answers for you. Waves are generated by the wind blowing over the sea. Friction with the surface causes ripples to form, which grow into waves. The amount of energy in waves depends on their height. The higher the wave, the more energy. So wave height is determined by the speed of the wind, or wind speed and strength. Stronger the wind, more friction, bigger wave, more energy. The wind duration, so the longer duration of wind, bigger wave, more energy, or the length of fetch. We've mentioned fetch in a previous lesson. It's the distance of water that a wave is blowing. So the bigger the distance of water, the bigger the fetch, the bigger the wave, the more energy. Again, why surfing happens in Hawaii. When waves approach the shore, the base is slowed by friction. Okay, so think of a bicycle. If you're going down a hill on your bike, and then you try and slow down, but you only press the front brake, you tip over. You know, the back wheel is going faster than the front wheel, and so the bike flips over, and you get very badly injured. Waves do a very similar thing. The bottom of the wave is slowed down because it's hitting the seabed. The top of the wave is carrying on the same speed because it's not hitting the seabed, and so it catches up and it topples over. So when waves approach the shore, the base is slowed by friction with the seabed, but the top carries on moving forward. Eventually the wave will topple over and break onto the beach or cliffs as swash. Then gravity brings it straight back in the backwash. Again, that's something we picked up from the longshore drift diagram last lesson. So now you've got your copy and complete done. We are essentially just going to look at the two types of wave before we're done on this section. Okay, so there are YouTube videos you can watch with diagrams, etc. And there's another pretty decent video actually that is from this Time for Geography website, which is pretty outstanding geography videos they've done in short snippets. Totally free, by the way. If you type in timeforgeography.co.uk, there's videos on so many geography things that might help you understand. But that is saved on this one, particularly for constructive and destructive waves, is saved onto 365. But to summarise your understanding, to make sure you've got it in your notes, on 365 is a handout, this handout, but this one on the screen is wrong, okay, or some of it might be wrong. What you need to do is try and work out, for constructive waves, which statements are correct. So I'll help you with the first one. Constructive waves, either they crash onto the beach or they gently roll onto the beach. Constructive waves, strong swash, weak backwash, they're much more gentle. They're going to construct beach, build a beach, so they're not likely to crash onto the beach. They're more likely to gently roll onto the beach, okay? Because otherwise, if they crashed onto the beach, they might scour it away. So This one is a switch, okay? It's because it's stick or switch. Some of them, okay, might be stick, but you need to have a little look through and make sure you've got the right one for each. So you need essentially a series of characteristics for constructive waves and a series of characteristics for destructive waves, so you can tell the difference and you could describe it in an exam, the characteristics of each. But this handout is wrong. Your handout needs to be correct. Okay, so have a little look, try and work out which ones to stick and switch, and when you've worked it out, you can write to fill in the gaps in the handout that's saved on 365. Okay, when you're ready, unpause the screen and I will go through the answers for you. Okay, so the first one, the diagrams is stick. Okay, the first bit of text is switch, then it's switch again, so they're the wrong way around, you need to put them in the right way around. The next one is stick, switch, stick, stick, switch. Okay, so by stick or switch, if it says switch, it means that this one's under the wrong heading, it needs to be over here, and vice versa. Alright, I'm sure you get that. Okay, now that ends this session on lesson 3 of coastal landscapes. Now, what I've done, okay, there you go, there's the completed handout, okay, so the one with the right answers. If you want to pause the screen to make sure yours is correct, please do. So this completes this session, the third session on coastal landscapes, and what you've done so far is cover all the physical processes that you need to know to help explain the landforms which we're about to start looking at. The reason you need to know these processes is because a very common 8-mark exam question in this topic asks you to explain or examine the processes which formed whatever it might be. It might be a cave, it might be an arch, a stack, a stump, a spit, a wave-cut platform. So you'll get a diagram in an exam which gives you a diagram of one of those features, and you need to examine the different processes which created it, because it's never just one thing. You can't just say, oh, how are caves formed? Hydraulic action, boom, that's 8 marks. It's not going to happen. You need to know far more detail, and that's why the first 3 lessons cover erosion, weathering, transportation, mass movement, longshore drift, blah 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 blah, because all of those things matter to help explain the formation of landforms. If I could give you an analogy to help, this will really sort of help you going into the next lesson. And I might even repeat this analogy at the start of the next session that's recorded, just to kind of put it into context for you. If you're a carpenter, okay, and you want to build a cabinet, okay, like a nice piece of furniture, whatever it might be, starts off with the raw materials, the wood. Okay, you need to get the wood, and the wood can be different. You can have hardwoods, softwoods, rosewood, ebony, whatever it might be, pine, that sort of thing. Wood is the ingredient. In coasts, geology is what we're talking about with the wood. Now, some of those woods, softwoods for example, have certain characteristics, just like some geologies have certain characteristics. Hardwoods are more resistant. Okay, you're going to create a stronger bit of furniture. Softwoods are less resistant. Okay, hard geology more resistant, soft geology less resistant. Some woods are full of knots and weaknesses and cracks and faults. Other woods are pretty solid and flawless, just like geology. Okay, sometimes you can use more than one type of wood to make a bit of furniture, and often they do. Often they'll use MDF to make the base of it, and then they'll cover it in a decorative wood over the top. Coasts, again, there are different types of geologies side by side. So geology and the type of geology is the first thing we need to be aware of, and you've got knowledge on that now. Once the carpenter's got his wood and chosen his wood to use, he then has lots of tools and equipment to then turn that wood into something else. Okay, take the raw materials and change it. So he's got a saw, he's got a coping saw and a bow saw and all these things. He's got a drill, he's got a sander, he's got varnishes, he's got glues, all these different things that will change that raw material, that wood, into the end result, the cabinet. And the cabinet is what is left behind once all the tools have been used and the carpenter's worked its magic. So at the coast, the geology is affected by erosion, weathering, mass movement. They are all the tools. They're all the things that change it into the landscapes that we see at the end. So if you see a sea arch, you guys need to be able to explain firstly what geology was like to start with, what type of geology is going to create that. Then what tools, what things did the sea do and the weathering do, and all these other processes, what happened to then turn that geology into the arch, which is the end result. Okay, I'm hoping that analogy makes a lot of sense in terms of understanding why, as geographers, you need to know all of these processes which we've been covering over the last few lessons. Okay, now once we get into next lesson, you'll start to see it kind of come to a bit more fruition, and you'll see it drawn together. But it's really important that you know these processes. They're not interesting. In fact, they're quite boring. But knowing them really helps you explain and develop your explanation ready for an exam situation. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me waffle on yet again, and I will see you next time where we're going to start to look at coastal erosion landforms.